Let's face it, no one can get enough Rick and Morty. The universe-hopping adventures have featured all sorts of genres so far. So obviously, they need to visit anime characters next, and I've got some ideas. If you haven't seen Rick and Morty, it's pretty simple. He's a mad scientist who has godlike levels of intellect and massively self-destructive attitude. Along with members of his family, he travels throughout the multiverse, getting into bizarre, often existentially horrifying adventures. The real draw of the show is to deconstruct high-concept sci-fi pop culture in funny ways. So, a Rick and Morty adventure to an anime world wouldn't be so much about the fights as it would be about how Rick would mess everything up for his own amusement and ours. Rick's not really into the whole superhero craze. We found out during his stay with the Vindicators that their showy bravado and heroic demeanor really get under his skin. That's why he would love Saitama, the least showy superhero of all time. Once Rick found a superhero that could defeat any villain with one punch, you just know what he'd do. Yeah, that's right, he'd create increasingly powerful mutants and robots until he created one that could destroy Saitama. These creations would be increasingly ridiculous and hilarious, but you just know that none of them would work. The problem with Saitama is that he's a lot like Rick. His character is a parody of superheroes, so his powers don't really have any rules or proper limits to them. So Rick would slowly descend into anger and madness as he continually failed to make a creature that could top him. This would basically make him Wile E. Coyote to Saitama's Roadrunner for a while. After watching each and every one of his brilliant creations fail to survive the all-powerful punches, he would have to admit defeat. That would probably be one of the hardest and most humbling experiences of Rick's life. For Saitama, it would be a pretty normal Tuesday. If there's a god of destruction in every universe, according to Dragon Ball Super, then Earth's C-137's is definitely Rick. This would be the perfect way for Rick to play the ultimate game of universal survival, the Tournament of Power. How much fun would Rick have gathering random warriors from his universe to compete against other universes? This would basically be his version of a board game night. Of all of the other gods of destruction, obviously Beerus would be his chief rival. The sardonic god is too much like Rick for him to go unnoticed. So Team Universe C-137 would have to go up against Goku and all of his friends. As we've seen from Rick, he doesn't exactly fight fair. Instead of collecting warriors, he'd likely put in a clone of himself to solo every other universe's champion. After using a bunch of sci-fi hijinks to defeat everyone else, that would leave only Goku and his unbeatable Ultra Instinct. We've seen Rick get beaten up pretty easily, so we know he wouldn't have the fighting strength to take Goku. That's why he'd make an exact clone of Goku to fight himself until he could get a good shot in. After the tournament was done, he'd smile at Beerus and wish for all the universes to be returned. Just kidding, he'd want that Szechuan sauce. In the Naruto Shippuden anime, once the dust had cleared from the Shinobi War and even the Akatsuki was no more, one monster still stood. Kaguya Otsutsuki, mother of all ninja and the ultimate villain of the series. She spent generations manipulating the world for her final plan to unite everyone in the world into a shared dream so that she could do with them as she pleased. So, she sounds like the perfect girl for Rick, am I right? We haven't seen Rick take on a lot of love interests throughout the show, but we've seen a few. The most notable one is Unity. Both are esoteric beings that are practically gods of their world. Unity even shares Kaguya's love of forced hive minds. Naturally, Rick would stumble into the whole infinite Tsukuyomi situation and be instantly smitten. After he helped her destroy those pesky ninja brats that wanted to ruin everything, the two would get into a relationship. Of course, like Unity, it would descend into self-destruction for them both. Now, we don't know much about Rick's past, but we've seen some bits and pieces over the years. Evidently, he hung out with a tight crew of outlaws like Birdperson and Squanchy. From the look of their little squad, there's one anime character who would fit right in: Spike Spiegel from Cowboy Bebop. The detached bounty hunter outlaw would be like Rick's other friends in that he'd show up from time to time just to hang out. Only one day, he'd get invited but never show up. Rick would try to call him, but Jet would tell him the news. Spike finally met up with Vicious, but neither of them survived. Rick would hang up and leave the party without a word to anyone. Under his breath, he'd say, "See ya, Space Cowboy," as he went into his shop. We don't see Rick get truly passionate about a lot of things. Sure, he has a lot of hobbies and experiments that he seems to enjoy fooling around with. None of those really seem like his passion anymore. He's so brilliant that all of his experiments and genius seem to almost annoy him. Beneath all of that boredom, there is one passion that comes from deep inside whatever he has where other people have hearts. His Disney World-style ride, Pirates of the Pancreas. We once saw him create an entire amusement park inside of a person's body, seemingly just for the purpose of this ride.
Pirates of the Pancreas was my baby.
So naturally, he'd get pretty excited about the opportunity to do some scouting for inspiration with real-life pirates. What pirates could possibly compare to the gang of lovable heroes Luffy and the Straw Hats? The only problem is that they really wouldn't like him. While Morty would fit in with the bunch instantly, Rick would have to come to terms with their disgust at his negative demeanor. Worst of all, not even they would like the idea of Pirates of the Pancreas, thus ruining the whole trip. The Castlevania universe is a desolate world where the only pleasures are monster carnage and the drink you pour yourself to drown out the night's horrors. So it basically sounds like the perfect vacation spot for Rick and Morty. Think about how much fun they had at the Purge planet, letting all that rage loose. If they thought that was a good time, using mech suits to destroy endless waves of deadly creatures would be even better. Afterwards, Rick would chill with his new best friend, Trevor Belmont, the only man who can keep up with him at a bar. Heck, Belmont might even drink Rick under the table. It'd be fun until they finally destroyed Dracula and the vamps. Of course, then Rick would just leave and start a new save file. You see, the Castlevania anime universe would actually just be a souped-up version of the Castlevania video game. This holographic simulation would basically be Rick doing a Westworld, but with vampires. It's not really Rick and Morty without a high-concept genre twist that makes you rethink your entire concept of reality. Unfortunately for Rick, every once in a while, Morty gets to pick an adventure. If Morty were a real kid, he'd obviously love anime, and his favorite series would be even more obvious. Morty is 100% a die-hard My Hero Academia fan. So, with incredible reluctance, Rick would portal them to the My Hero Academia universe to make all of Morty's dreams come true. Here he'd find a true purpose as he took over Midoriya's role as All Might's new pupil. Once he took on the One for All quirk, he'd join the academy and finally have the mentor and the school of his dreams. Obviously, this would bore Rick to tears though. He'd portal them instantly to the League of Villains lair where they could take out All for One at last. Except Rick would be impressed with All for One's style. After Morty insults Rick and tell him he's not as cool as All Might, Rick would join the League of Villains out of spite. Thus, a bitter superhero conflict between Rick and Morty would begin, culminating in a decked-out Rick fighting against the One for All powered Morty. One day, Rick would run out of batteries for one of his devices. He'd make a pit stop in the Fullmetal Alchemist universe where the laws of physics are a bit different, like the magical dragon world. He'd create a few pocket universes full of life and then destroy them in order to make himself a few superpowered Philosopher's Stones. Now this would obviously anger Edward Elric, who would challenge Rick. The two would proceed to have an epic alchemist battle, the likes of which the world has never seen. Meanwhile, I think Morty and Al would just hang out. Maybe play some video games. It's gotta be stressful being the sidekick to a high-strung genius. Let's face it, both of them could use the break. At the end, Rick and Ed would finish their fight and Rick would return home with his stones. Morty would be the real winner though, because no Philosopher's Stone could be as powerful as friendship. I mean, not literally, because those stones are like crazy powerful, but you get my point. In the Attack on Titan universe, Annie Leonhardt is a cold, ruthless fighting machine with incredible Titan powers. She cares only for her mission and seeks to remove any emotional attachments that might get in the way. So Rick would obviously like her a lot more than Summer. After Rick and Morty have an off-screen adventure in the Attack on Titan universe, they'd ask Annie if she'd like to join them. Annie, having no real ties to her world aside from her family, would pack into the portal and abandon her miserable world. Summer would then start to notice that Rick and Morty invite her on less adventures in favor of the far more versatile Annie. This would push Summer to her breaking point where she would once again use the Morphizer XE to turn herself into a Titan. Then she'd challenge Annie to an epic Titan fight that would rip through the city. Of course, Annie would own Summer in any physical contest. Annie is one of the best fighters in her universe, while Summer is just a kid. That is why Summer would cheat, using one of Rick's weapons Annie is unfamiliar with. In the end, Rick would be sad to lose his best sidekick ever, but he'd be just a little proud of Summer for having cheated so ruthlessly. It would almost be heartwarming, aside from the post-Titan carnage. Well, there you have it. All the worlds Rick and Morty desperately need to visit. Are there any other anime universes they need to check out? Let us know how that'd go in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to CBR.